My name is Jason Wallace. I'm with Merchant Devin, this company right here. On this mix, you might have seen some of the beers. I think I was in for the Craft Beer Week, and we did the old versus new. Anybody come to that show? Very cool. So we had the old versus new, which was perfect for our lineup with our portfolio. And you'll see that definitely after looking through some of the beers tonight. I'm with the importer called Merchant Devin. Long story short, quite honestly, some of the best breweries in the world. Over 3,200 years of brewing experience between the 10 breweries that we represent. But we are simply the sole importers for the 10 breweries that you see. So Samuel Smith is our largest, all the way down to a very small craft brewery that's out of Scotland called Choquer. And so Brian's going to pass these out tonight if you like. This is some of you that have been in the class before have seen this in the past. This is our simplest, our nice little take-home reminder. It's all about beer styles. That's really how we are as a marketer. In the U.S., we don't sell the brewery based on what they want us to sell. We sell it based on the style. We think it'll fit the needs of what's going on in the universe of all things beer. So, with the company, with Merchant Devin, we actually were founded in 1978, and at that same time, we brought over the first brewery in the United States, which is Samuel Smith. So, when Chad asked me if I'd come in and talk about Smith, of course, that's pretty much our lifelong. It's our blood that really kind of pumps through the veins of Merchant Devin. It's really what built the company 37 years later and has made us what we are to this day. So Smith is actually our largest brewery we import. It has the biggest selection of SKUs that we represent because the thing is ultimately the styles that come out of England, ranging anywhere from cider to lager, all the way up to from classic pale ales all the way up to full-bodied imperial stouts, even barrel-aged, bottle-conditioned strong ales. Samuel Smith does it. And so out of that portfolio, the brewery actually produces 17 of the beers that we actually bring to the U.S. In total, they do roughly about 30-plus beers total, so for themselves. And so who has not had a Samuel Smith beer? Show of hands.
Anybody ever not had a Samuel Smith beer?
Don't be afraid. That's fine. That's fine. So it's unique, though. It's been the mainstay of our portfolio, like I said. It's been around for many years, but then still, I get a lot of that. I get a lot of people that will say, the first beer I ever had was when I first started drinking in 19-something, or, you know what, today is the first day I'll have a Samuel Smith in this portfolio. So welcome to the club after this experience. In the portfolio, what we like to show off is the fact that the beers are very, very classic. And so in this portfolio, you're going to see some of the styles that we'll have this evening. We're going to kind of keep the traditional lineup and then throw in a kind of a curveball at the end, which is one of our fruited ales that the brewery does. But a little history on the brewery. Samuel Smith, founded in 1758. And let's see if I can get my little sheet going. I love to use the website for us. It's a great little piece that we always show our users that are into looking on the internet. What's also nice about this as well is if anybody's familiar with, loves documentaries, there's some great history. There's some videos that have been shot at the breweries. If anybody knows who's this, if anybody recognizes this gentleman here, this is actually one of the key reasons why Samuel Smith is actually in the U.S., and that's Michael Jackson, the beer writer. So, but he is instrumental in bringing and helping Sam Smith get to the United States per the relationship or friendship that the owner, founder of Merchant Devin, Charles Finkel, had actually met Michael Jackson. He's actually from the same county, that county of York, where Samuel Smith actually resides. And so he actually was instrumental in actually kind of doing the key introductions for Charles to actually approach Samuel Smith to bring the beers to the United States in 1978. So, but some nice little pieces here. I've got some great videos. The reason I asked Chad if I could show this tonight is quite honestly, I think after you'll see some of the photos that we'll have from the breweries, we're talking about a 257-year-old brewery, okay? Still independently owned. It's now working on its 8th generation for the brewery owners. It has been passed down from generation to generation, but kept very, very, very traditional. And you'll see that when I show you some of the photos. And so it's always nice to show that, especially for the fact that we can't just go across the state line or across the country to go over to see a brewery such as this, and ultimately on top of it to actually see something such a traditional brewery such as Samuel Smith and ultimately they go into one and see one that actually works on the 7-day operational schedule. So this is not a very, very romantic brewery, so to speak. It's a working brewery. They make beer. They make beer solely for the thriving of their own pubs. So for Samuel Smith in England, has anybody actually ever been over to England, been to one of the Samuel Smith pubs? Okay. Which one did you hit? Okay. Another show of hands. You don't recall? Okay. Well, if anything, if to add to it, to this day, there's over 300 of Samuel Smith pubs in the UK. Okay. What makes the brewery thrive is the fact that they're making their own beer for their own proprietary pubs. So really, quite honestly, the lifeline goes through the UK with their own pubs. The brewery owner, Humphrey Smith, his philosophy with his pubs is to keep it simple, keep it clean, keep it warm, keep it inviting, have people come in, enjoy their daily pint, and keep it very reasonable. Everything that rolls through the pub in this instance is quite honestly owned by Sam Smith, even down to if you come in and you only want to have a soda, or if you want to have let's say a mixed drink. If you don't want the beer, which I wouldn't understand why you wouldn't want the beer, but if you only want to come in for the alcohol, quite honestly, it's all proprietary. So it's all within house. And so it's really, quite honestly, it's a thriving business that the brewery has set up. And so for them, their lifeline is in their pubs. For us in the U.S. and also other parts of the country or other parts of the world, Smith has also thrived as still being a primary sole importer from Merchant of Vin. And so we have become great partners with them. We launched into China a few years ago. We've been in the U.S., like I said, since 1978. But there's a nice relationship that we have between us and the brewery. And the nice thing is that the styles are very, very easy to teach on, easy to introduce people into the category of beer. And ultimately, the thing is, as you can see just from the lineup of beers on the side of the portfolio, it's actually very, very accommodating. Somebody usually can look through that lineup and say, ooh, that sounds good. Or, ooh, wow, I haven't had that one before. Or I haven't had that one years ago. So anyway, if we want, we can throw into the first beer. So, all right. So, first beer. The nice thing about Samuel Smith is classic English lager, classic English ales. The ales is where you see the charm of the portfolio. What is nice about the portfolio, quite honestly, hands down with the portfolio, is the accommodation with food. Very, very food compatible, very, very mild. What you're going to see is exposed is in the malt bill. The hops that are used in this beer are quite honestly very, very mild hops. They're considered to be very aromatic hops, but not very harsh bittering hops. And so in this beer, what you're going to find out is what you really want to explore is the fact of the malt that's coming through. So in this first beer that we're going to have, which is the Nut Brown Ale, these three beers that we're going to first try, the Nut Brown, the Taddy Porter, and the Oatmeal Stout, are quite honestly our three most traditional beers that we had. I was made a phone call today to one of our coworkers that's in the company, and anybody hear about this news story that's going on today about October 21st, 1985, Back to the Future Part 2? Okay? So on the way down here, I had a nice little 4-hour drive today, so I picked up the phone and called a coworker, and I said, and he was actually quite honestly been with the company for over 30 years. I had asked him a question. I said, what beers do we have in 1985 from Samuel Smith versus the ones we have today? And he said, well, we had Old Brewery Pale Ale, which is actually considered now our organic ale recipe, which is close to the top. That was the first beer we launched in 1978, a very classic English drinking pale ale, very unique at the time when we introduced it. He gave me a little history on it. He said, Jason, that beer when it was introduced in 1978 was $32 a case for 24 12-ounce bottles. Okay? That's if you were to go to a liquor store, pick it up, and purchase it at the store. The highest priced beer at that time, in 1978, was $14, called Heineken. If you can see the difference between the two, we were almost double the price of what you'd spend for Heineken versus Sam Smith. But we also were introducing a beer into the market that was, one, quality-ridden, much more higher price point. But in turn, we said, you know what, we have confidence in this beer, and we think this beer will sell. And so in 1978, we launched Stout with a very over $30 per case price point. The beer actually, Samuel Smith. Who remembers Samuel Smith back to the day when it came in 6-packs? Anybody? A few of you. It was back in the mid-'80s, actually, when we used to have Samuel Smith in 6-packs. And so to this day, actually, if you looked at it today, you'd find it in the stores in the 4-pack sections, or sometimes in the bombers. But in 1985, going back to then, he said, Joe said, we had 4 styles. We had Old Brewery Pale Ale, Nut Brown Ale, Taddy Porter, and Oatmeal Stout. So the 3 beers we're going to have this evening are actually the 3 that date back 30 years ago. So kind of a throwback for us this evening. So for those of you who have had these 3 beers in the past, nothing wrong with reintroducing yourself. It's a blast from the past. Let's go back 30 years. For those of you who haven't, I think it's a test of time to be able to say that you have a beer you've actually that has stood this long amount of time and has stayed very, very traditional and true to style. And so we show off these styles because, one, like I mentioned before, we're marketers of beer style. We wanted to taste basically what kind of built England, what kind of built the UK. These are 3 styles that Smith has hung their hat on for many years. Introducing on top of that, having other styles such as Pale Ale. Their number one produced beer is actually a bitters. They do 2 different styles of bitters every day. That's cask produced, but they range it from basically what the consumer wants. But for this is the only brew that we actually have in house that actually has such a large arrangement of SKUs that actually has demand all the way across from start to end. So, Nut Brown Ale. Who has not had a Nut Brown Ale before? No? Have you heard of Newcastle? Never had a Newcastle? Okay. Newcastle is considered Newcastle, and sometimes the reason I ask that is because brown ales are usually in 2 different classes. In my opinion, you have a brown ale such as a Newcastle, and Newcastle has always kind of been just Newcastle. It's been hung their hat on one style. Oh, thank you. And then with Samuel Smith, we tend to see that's the other option. So at this case, and so how we've always taught this is 2 different styles that were imported in the U.S. From the U.K. The Newcastle style seems to be a little more sweeter. Comes in a clear bottle, has a little more aromatics to it, and also has a little more toffee-like candied aromas to it. Am I wrong? Am I right? Is there a strike chord? What do you get when you taste the Nut Brown Ale? Same or contrast? Do you have a sweetness? Or do you pick up a little dryness? Dryness. Okay. Aromatics? Little, not a lot? Okay. I pick up a little bit of walnut, sometimes a little bit of hazelnut. Now keep in mind, there's a disclaimer sometimes being thrown out there that there were no nuts harmed, or if you have a nut allergy, there was no nuts in this beer whatsoever. The Nut Brown is always speaking strictly for the finish or the color of the beer, okay, and which is all derived from the malt. And so what you're going to notice with Sam Smith is that they're basing all their beer styles off of the malt. The malt is really the key. For us to find out what the malt bill is almost like asking them to turn over trade secrets. But for the brewery to tell you what kind of hops they're using or when they added it into the mash or anything, that's easily accessible. But to find out the information as far as the malt bill, that's almost like close to heart. We don't expose that. But very, very light, very easy drinking. Quite honestly, this is one of my favorite beers in the portfolio. It's got a little sweetness. It's one of the best beers, I think, to introduce to somebody that's actually afraid of malt, afraid to get into the characteristics of what malt or what a nutty or sweeter, little more dense beers are like. This is a step up from going from a pale ale or bitters into the category, but it's lightly hopped. Out of this portfolio of beers that you see, this is a beautiful beer to pair up with spice. And I've always said this in the past. I think we actually compared this at our Old World versus New World. This is a beautiful beer when you want to put it up against spice. If anybody likes Thai food, Szechuan, barbecue, anything with a little bit of heat to it, what I like about this beer is it has a little nice sweet maltiness in the backbone that actually will pair up against that heat that's thrown at it and add a little bit of refresher to the palate. So, can you see that? What do you think overall? Drinkable? Good, good. One of my favorite styles. The nuttiness comes from, like I said, a little bit of the finish from the malt. It's a great everyday drinker, I think. In the case when I'm comparing it back to Newcastle, what I mentioned was with Newcastle seems to have more of a sweeter, more of a southern style, as we've kind of sometimes expressed. When it comes to Smith is located in the northeast part of the UK, and so it actually is more of a northern style, a little more drier finish, a little more of an aperitif, so to speak. So, cool. 5% alcohol, very easy to drink. As I mentioned, these three beers that you're going to have are all about the malt. We don't talk about the bitterness. We really don't. The bitterness is just more or less a preservative, and that's how it's always been kept. This style has been actually produced for well over 50 years by the brewery. It's one of their top-selling styles, actually one of our top-selling styles that we sell in the U.S. as well. It's kind of one of the ones, as I mentioned, going back 30 years to 85, this is what built Samuel Smith in the United States. So, all right. Cheers. Everyone. There we go. While they are pouring, getting ready. Oh, you're ready for the next one. All right. She's going to pour off the Taddy Porter. Kind of in between, I wanted to show off some of the visuals, and thank you again, Chad, for putting this together. This is actually Smith. What's unique with Smith, and as I mentioned it before, is it really is very unrecognizable as a brewery. It's not where you pull up; it's a destination. There's nothing else around it. It literally sits on a common main street in the town of Tadcaster, England. It's from the county of York. If anybody have ever seen, I think I've got a. Oops, no coasters. All right, there's actually this guy right here. Those of you that might have ever seen this before, this is actually the Yorkshire Rose. Anybody seen this before? This is actually the pride and joy of the county of York, and so everything you'll see with Smith is tied to the Yorkshire Rose. And so that is very traditional for Smith. You'll see it on their bottles. You'll see it on their coasters. Anytime we have a chance to tie it in, it's tied in with the county of York, and that's really where it all started for the brewery. The brewery was founded in 1758. It was actually founded by a cousin of the brewery. It was later purchased in 1886 by Samuel Smith I. In 1886, he purchased the brewery, which is where it sits today. The same water source that was actually sunk in 1758 was actually still on this site. So the brewery has never moved from its location. In the town of Tadcaster, which holds, I believe, roughly between 8 and 12,000 is the number, the town actually has three different breweries. Three breweries that are actually functioning. Samuel Smith, it's been there for 250 plus years. Another brewery right next to it called John Smith, if you ever heard of that before. It's actually located right next to it. And on the outskirts of town is actually a Coors plant. But what is recognizable about this is the fact that three breweries in a town is so small, but what is actually optimal about this is that it has a water table that is highly in demand. And so the water that actually flows through the town of Tadcaster is perfect for brewing ales and lagers. And so the water source is really what's been after. And so that's why it's drawn in by these by the breweries in the mix. Yes, sir. Yep, it is true. Yep. Yep. You're kind of stealing my thunder here. I was actually going to say, no, I'm fine. I'm just kidding you. It's got a bus stop. No, actually, it's true. It's true. It's very, very true. Smith, even out of that lineup of beers that we do out of the portfolio, a lot of the breweries being older breweries and production, majority in that portfolio still do open top fermenting. So out of that mix, we have Smith, we have Lindemans, we have Eyinger, we have Pincus. We have 6 or 7 out of the 10 that actually do open top fermenting. And so if you're not familiar with open top fermenting, we'll get to the point where I'll show you that. But Smith is actually one of the ones that does it on a large scale. And so he definitely one of the reasons why I have the pictures is to show you the reason why we do, why Smith does what it does. This is actually the front of the brewery. It's on the busiest street in the town. It's basically Main Street. This is the front of the brewery. It's mainly offices. The back side, you can see the tall smokestack. On this side, actually a little farther back, it's a vertical brewery, so this is actually where the working brewery starts. In the upper level, it'll start with the malt mill and then kind of work its way down, all the way down to the lower level. The brewery works off of coal, clean coal. But in this case, like I said, you wouldn't notice. You would pass right by it because it doesn't really have anything blaring that says Sam Smith or stop here for a Sam Smith beer or any of that type of thing. The number one pub that they have is actually on the side there. It's called the Angel and the White Horse. That's the tan brick. What's unique with them is that they pretty much are making beer for the working man. We tend to emulate it for the fact that they make damn good beer, and that's the portfolio that we like to bring to the U.S. And so a lot of the portfolio that we'll have, these are the ones that we had earlier. This is the Taddy Porter that we're on. There's the Nut Brown. One of the favorites of mine that's actually out is this guy here. Anybody ever had Winter Welcome? It's been out for 26 years if you didn't know it. Samuel Smith introduced it in 1990 in the U.S. It was the first ever imported winter beer. And if you look at it now, we're spoiled. We're spoiled not only with winter beers, we're spoiled with pumpkin beers, we're spoiled with fall beers, we're spoiled with Oktoberfest beers. It's almost like Christmas for a kid starting to go into the fall season because it's just like, what's coming out now? I can't wait. And then from late September or mid-September all the way to the end of Christmas, it's almost like you could almost have a new beer every day with everything out in the market. But Samuel Smith Winter Welcome is actually the first ever winter import beer. It's our 26th anniversary of the beer, and the new recipe is already out. Yes, sir. We have 17. There's roughly 13 other styles that they do, or there's other beers. So they have two bitters. They have a dark mild, a regular mild. They have a mild stout. They have a triple X stout. So they're doing it. They actually do a stout that is very dry, almost like a Guinness, 3%, 3.5%. That is, being the fact that they hold all their beer in house at the pub. And the gentleman that you said you went to the pub, did you try any of the styles you couldn't get here in the U.S.? Okay. Yeah. And quite honestly, the bitters is one of my favorites. They have one that's actually called Sovereign Bitters. It's actually, instead of being used with the ale yeast, they use a lager yeast. Phenomenal. Fruitiness that rolls through it. It's very clean. It's wonderful. I mean, the bitters are meant to be that easy drinking, poundable, 3% beer. They're both done on cask, which is even better. But it's unique because when you go into the pubs are all the very traditional, ornate wood, beautiful backgrounds. They usually have two different bars that they'll serve from. One that's a little more decorative, more traditional, and that's the one that usually has the pump cask. And then they'll have another one that actually is a little more kind of a fast serve, kind of get up to the front quick and kind of serve when they get the high traffic. And so, but a little bit of representation. This is actually just kind of what the consumers think of the portfolio. So if anybody does any of the rating of the beers or Untapped or those type of things up there, this is actually kind of a recently as of August. But the brewery shows well, and you kind of see that in what the portfolio shows. And so they're very well regarded. We're very, very happy for it. We know how it holds in our heart, but we also tend to think that with consumer ratings such as Rate Beer, it means that ultimately, too, is that there's some type of recognition of what the brewery's doing, and they're doing something right. So let's go into this guy, Taddy. Taddy Porter. So I always just ask this question with porters. What came first, the porter or the stout? You guys believe that? It did. The stout is the cousin of the porter. The stylistically wise, it was produced for the trained porters. It is meant to have something that was actually darker in color. Porter was at that time a little more popular. They were looking for something that was more significant to that trade of industry. And so stout was actually a derivative off of it, to where stout was meant to be more burly, more heftier shoulders, maybe a little more malt, and basically mixed into the mix, and so we get a little more heaviness. What I love about porter is that it doesn't fill me up. It doesn't keep me like a gut bomb. I don't know about you, as I get older, I can't drink as much as I used to. I also notice that I like to have beers that don't have as much heaviness to them. And so with stouts, I tend to kind of pull back, so I look for a little lighter beer, maybe a nut brown ale, maybe a Taddy porter in the mix. But what I love about it is it still has all the beautiful roastiness, the nice dark mill, the opaque color that shines through, that you would also may get in a stout, but doesn't have the heaviness. So, who has not had this beer before? Show of hands. Who likes porter in general? Who would normally drink a porter in general? Who would normally drink a stout in general? Who would drink a beer if it just was handed to him? Taddy, in my opinion, I tend to feel it in the States anymore. In the last 10 years, it seems like porter has kind of gone the wayside. There's some breweries that will grab a porter and make a wonderful porter and do it up really, really well. Then you'll see some breweries that will come out and just put out a porter as a seasonal. And it's a little bit of time spent, but I tend to say that there's a lot of really good quality porters that are out there. So definitely seek them out. There's a few that stand out in my mind. We've done taste tests between Old World versus New World. What I love about the porter from Smith, very, very food compatible. This is actually what we call a shellfish beer. This is unique because not many people would think that, hey, I can have crustacean, I can have clams, oysters, something with a hard calcium shell with this beer. And that's really quite honestly what you get. You have a really nice high calcium component. It pairs wonderful with anything shellfish-wise. So if you think about if you're going to pair something up, maybe do some mussels with a little bit of fresh fennel, definitely think about grabbing a porter. If it wasn't a Smith porter, maybe just a nice porter in general to pair with that. Definitely get a chance to see the kind of the shine that comes through because you have a beer that's not as heavy, but it has a little bit of acidicness on the backside that will actually pair up with the mussels as well. So, what do you think of the Taddy overall? Yeah, very cool. So, all right, back to the brewery. So, we're almost to that part that the gentleman burst my bubble on. But this is actually Smith. This is a few pictures from inside the brewery. This is actually a brewery that they don't actually offer tours unless you're industry, but there's not a where you can roll up and they have tours daily. This is a working brewery, folks. This is a 7-day-a-week brewery to keep up with the demand that they have just for their 300-plus pubs, plus the U.S., and any other export market that they have. And so for them, it's a working brewery. It's not all about glitz and glam with them. It keeps it very, very traditional. This is one of their mash tuns. This is one of their other brew kettles that they have on the lower level where they're actually throwing their hops into. But really nothing too sexy. Really, quite honestly, it's a working brewery. A lot of copper. A lot of copper was evident back then. What I love about this is I've actually stood next to this pound of Fuggles. Fuggles is the #1 used hop they have. And most of the beers that you're trying, anywhere from the pale all the way up to the Imperial Stout, is actually seasoned with the Fuggle hop. Very, very light bitterness, beautiful aromatics, but more of an indigenous hop that's for the UK, so that's where they have an abundance of them. So, but that hop bundle right there, what blows me away is I've seen hops that have been produced in the US and shipped around, and they're usually in much more easy manageable bundles or bales. This one is someone is easily pushing about 9 feet tall. 9 feet tall. I tried to ask how much that thing weighs at one point. All I know is I don't think anybody could actually pick it up, but very unique. So there's your tank. So Smith is one of the few breweries in the UK that actually uses stone fermentation tanks to this day. Why? Well, this is what they had available 250 plus years ago. Why break up a good thing? What is unique, though, is the combination of the yeast strain that they're using, which dates back to early 1900s, tied in with the fact that they're using stone. The two go hand in hand. So the ale yeast that they're using has picked up the essence of being able to use the stone, and also too that it's been said that the stone by the use of using the open top fermenters for Smith, that the beers such as the Nut Brown all the way up to the Imperial Stout, they have a little more extra creaminess or a little more mouthfeel, a little larger mouthfeel that goes on. So when you try these beers, they have just a little more expressiveness that kind of shows through, and that's because of the tie-in of fermenting the beers and open-top fermenters made of stone. Very, very unique. This is really, it's like I said, it's a working piece of equipment. The brewery has well over 40 of these things. They measure 10 foot by 10 foot square. They go double deep, so it's a 10-foot drop, but then there's roughly a 20-foot total drop from the top. So it's a double deep chamber, and I say that because it's actually, if you can see in, you would fill the tank in from one batch of beer being boiled, and it would fill up one open-top fermenter. Get some other pictures here. This is what's unique. This is called a sparge. The sparge is actually, so what happened is here at this point, they actually have pitched the yeast. And so what's happened right now, probably less than a day into the mix, the open-top fermenter is actually starting to, the yeast that's been pitched is actually starting to create a little bit of alcohol. And then what the sparge is doing is the sparge is grabbing all the beer from the bottom and bringing it all the way up the top, and then spraying it out across the top. So actually what happens is it gives a little equal time so the yeast actually has the ability to actually affect the whole batch. Make sense? Very unique. I always want to reach over and stick my finger in there. But what's unique, though, I will tell you this, is that if you do stick your head over the bowl, you get a huge, huge release of alcohol that kind of starts to pull through. Depends on what stage it's at. And so this is a case where the fermentation has gone through for a little longer period of time. What I always like to show off here is this, as you can see, where the almost like a cake, where the yeast has actually sat there. So this has probably gone through about 6 to 7 days of fermentation. It got up this high on the wall, and actually now what it's starting to do is it's starting to reside almost like a cake where it actually will start to come back down. And so in this case, they will shortly ship all the beer off into either fermentation tanks, or storage tanks, or into barrels, depending on which beer they're making. So, are we ready to roll into oatmeal? Okay. Okay, sir. No, same operation. Very, very clean in there, as you can see. It's like I said, still working brewery, but no. In that case, with this, same amount of time that goes through it. So we've talked to the more traditional, what you'd have, so there wouldn't be any extra amount of time because of open top versus a closed top. So the only beers that actually do not see open top fermentation are the lagers or the cider that Smith does, and those are actually done in just closed fermentation tanks. Sure. Yep. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Nine years ago. I've been with the company almost 8, and it happened shortly before I arrived. If we're going back 30 years when they were in the 6-pack, they were in the clear glass. That's how they originally came out. Every one of the bottles that Smith does, actually, the glass is actually formed at Smith. If you ever look at one of the few breweries that actually still does their own inscribing on the bottles, very, very unique, classic style that they're doing with the bottles, the Victorian pints. But yes, they used to have clear glass. And then they went to the vintage dark brown glass when they realized that you get a longer shelf life. And do keep in mind, we're shipping the beer from here to the U.S. And from here to the U.S., the distributor gets it to the stores or to the restaurants. And then it takes a little time. So there's always a little bit of time pattern that goes into it. But the thing is quite honestly, that you need to have a little extra time that goes through it. So all the beers from Smith are actually all pasteurized, with the exception of one, which is the Stingo that we actually have, which is their once-a-year barrel-conditioned, bottle-aged beer. But otherwise, the beers are all, because you need a little extra shelf life, you put through a little bit of pasteurization, and it actually hold for a little longer in the package. So, any questions on the fermentation tanks? This is definitely one of the key things I love to see when I go to the brewery. It's such a unique thing. Ultimately, for the thing is, and what I've mentioned to people with training with our distributors is that, there wasn't an abundance of stainless steel to actually go out and hammer out before industrialization took over in England, and so this is before that. And so, in case you need something else to actually hold your beer in, And so for Smith and also around the county was an abundance of slate. And so that's where they actually produced and hammered out these. And so we've been told that when anytime one of these actually has a crack in it, they're actually down for a longer period of time, almost 2 weeks, because of just the amount of man hours and power they actually have to come in and actually change one of the walls out. And so very, very labor intensive. So that's the cake-like. That's the brownie that I always like to show people. That's gone through the final stage where you're seeing it starting to drop. That's that. If you ever guys have noticed, those of you who bake, you pull the brownies out of the oven and start to kind of recede. That's the brownie, is what I always call it. So, and there's where the beer's made. Only two beers are made there. These are actually special beers. For those of you that I mentioned, we have one beer that's not pasteurized. It's called Yorkshire Stingo. Stingo is a once-a-year beer that the brewery makes. This is actually the tanks that they fit in, the barrels they fit into. But I had a lot of people that will ask me, even like Brian, our key distributor rep here, when's Sam Smith coming in kegs? That's why you're not going to get a keg of Samuel Smith. It's still one of the breweries in the UK that still uses wooden barrels. They do not use they use cooperage such as this only for getting the beer to their pubs. They have the hand pull at the pubs with their bitters. So the bitters are actually what mainly fills up these tanks. But in this batch right here, this is actually what they put off to the side. Yorkshire Stingo for Sam Smith is an experimental project that launched out to be now on its 5th year. It's a once-a-year strong ale recipe. If you see it in the stores, turn it over to the backside. Look at the date of when it was brewed. They will say a brewed-in date. But only basically that whole allotment right there will yield about 1,900 cases for the whole U.S. That's one batch right there. That batch will actually be aged in those barrels for 12 months. It's an Old English strong ale recipe. They'll age in those barrels for 12 months and then be bottled the next year later and released into the market every August 1st, which is Yorkshire Day in the UK. So nice story with them. It's first, like I said, an experimental project the brewery did, but they wanted to put something out that was unique. They had never done a strong ale recipe, and so this is the barrels that they use. And quite honestly, the barrels that you see here, there's really not a lot of newness to these barrels. They usually say the barrel average is about 45 years. And really for Smith, the only reason they're using the barrel is a transportation vessel. In this case, tied in with Stingo, Stingo actually adds as a mellowing agent. So what they'll do is they'll put in a little bit of yeast. It'll actually help with the beer to actually kind of calm it down, mellow it out, and start to eat away at anything, any extra unfermentables, and have just something kind of that'll actually mellow the beer down for about 12 months. So, are we on to oatmeal? And this is the last photo before I break up. This is David. David is one of Smith's only coopers. He's been there for over 30 years now. But David is actually one of the few that actually has a full-time job of being a cooper. All this guy does is he repairs barrels day in, day out. He replaces the staves that are in the barrels and basically makes them whole. I always kind of make fun of this because usually with kegs, have you ever seen a keg driver delivering kegs to a Sister Rose or a bar out there? Usually they're picking the kegs up off the truck and they're bouncing them off the full ground, and I've seen it many, many times, and you're just like, wow, that keg is going to explode. Imagine doing it with a wood one. Same thing happens when David that's what he has to do. He repairs the mistakes of when they have to roll it down into the basement of the pubs, or one that might fall off the back of the wagon when it's being delivered. But basically his job is to clean up the mess, so to speak, clean up the tanks. So really unique for Smith because why don't they change over to steel kegs? You got the inventory. You got a guy that can repair them. And why would you? It's traditional. Very, very traditional. So, all right, let's change back to beer. Are we on to Oatmeal Stout now? All right. Number one selling Samuel Smith beer in the United States, right there. We use the word benchmark. We put it in our portfolio. We feel there's a lot of styles in our portfolio that are considered benchmark. Definitely this is one that stands out. This is where it allowed us to actually have that relative purpose of using the term benchmark. But Smith has produced this style since 1981. They introduced it in the U.S. at that time. What's unique, though, is this is actually a style that was actually retired. In the right around 1980, Charles Finkel was looking for another style to bring to the U.S. He had already brought in Old Brewery Pale in 1978. He had brought in the Taddy Porter, but he was looking for another style to break, something a little darker. He had done some research and realized that they had produced an oatmeal stout at one point, and he found some. It was an advertisement they had found in the archives at Smith, and he brought it up to the Humphrey Smith and said, let's bring this back to life. What's the possibility of that? The ad was actually some propaganda that basically said, drink Samuel Smith Oatmeal Stout for lactating mothers. Because the oats in the beer will actually nourish your milk. I always thought, since I've been at the company, I was thinking, we are getting kind of risque anymore in these times. I would love to see that advertisement would look like to this day. But that was a little uniqueness that was behind it. The oats that's actually used in there adds a little more sweetness to the batch. So only 40% oats, 60% dark roasted barley. Darker in color, a little more heaviness. It's a true stout. But the oats that are added into that adds a little more residual sugars into that. So you get a little more lightness. Sometimes a little more creaminess that will kind of roll throughout. This is the beer that I will say, if I'm ever introducing somebody into stouts, this is the one I'll introduce them into. I don't care if it's, I don't like stouts. I don't like anything dark. I can't get into it. You know what? Try this stout, because instead of rolling them into an Imperial, a Guinness, a dry stout, you can maybe throw them into a milk stout. Might be a little too sweet. An oatmeal stout gives them appreciation of what the color is going to be, what the texture is going to be, but it actually still adds a little bit of that residual sweetness that keeps them instead of jumping all the way into the deep end, but gives them appreciation of what's in the bottle. So, what do you think of the oatmeal stout? The ultimate pizza beer, my opinion. Pizza's heavy, pizza's full, pizza can range in flavors. This one has a sweetness, has a little dryness, a little bit of heaviness. It's a perfect pizza beer. So, well, good. Glad you liked it. This is still one of our all-time favorites. This is one of our best sellers. Out of the portfolio, Smith does 3 stouts we bring into the U.S. We've kind of I think I've been here and tasted the chocolate stout in the past, haven't I? Yeah. I believe so, yeah. Anybody not had the chocolate stout, definitely you get a chance to grab that. Smith has definitely taken advantage of the darker, maltier beers, the porters, the stouts, the imperial stout, the chocolate stout that we started doing organically. So we definitely get to see the mystique that Smith puts into these darker, maltier beers. And it ranges really starting with the pale ale all the way up to the stouts. So, all right. We doing good so far? How are we doing on time? Almost there? All right, I'll keep rolling here. All right. Smith is one of the few, this is one of the ones I like to show off. This is actually Smith to this day. Actually, all of their pubs, they're not called Samuel Smith pubs. They're actually called, they're actually appropriate to the neighborhood they live in. Sometimes they're fictitious animals. Sometimes they are things such as the Golden Lion. But the ultimate thing is you would not know a Smith pub unless you actually walked into the pub and sat down and actually looked at the beer lineup that they had. I'm sorry, which one you said you were at? The Princess Louise. Okay. And so they're very unique. Did you notice a Smith pub until you went inside? Okay. So very, very unique. And that's kind of a tradition that Humphrey Smith, the owner, actually changed up, and he pulled all the signs down that used to say Samuel Smith. And the people that knew the directive of what the pub was, where the pub was, were the people that lived in the town. So they were going to be the ones that were going to the pub. They weren't trying to attract new people. They were trying to just basically keep the everyday patrons coming to the pub. And so by taking down the Sam Smith sign and ultimately putting up something like the Golden Lion, really just gave them something to say, you know what, this is significant to this place only. And that's really what the purpose was. This is a nice one. This is actually, if anybody's ever been up to Des Moines, Iowa, this is one of my best Samuel Smith pubs in the Midwest, called the Royal Mile. This is actually, because they have their own hand painting they do, this is one of the ones I'm proud of. They actually did a commemorative sign. So actually it's an old pub sign taken off of one of their pubs, and actually they refurbished it on one side, and on the other side is actually the old pub sign. Very, very cool. So, and this is the next thing. So This is actually one of the couple last things I'm going to show you. In the town of Tadcaster, what's unique is that pub that I mentioned that's right next to the brewery called the Angel and the White Horse. This is the reason for the Angel and the White Horse. His name is actually Sovereign. Sovereign is one of two horses. They're Yorkshire horses. But in the town of Tadcaster, they still deliver their beer by horse and wagon 5 days a week. Okay? It's a tradition that Humphrey brought back almost 20 years ago. It's very unique. The drays that they pull are these beautiful 4,000-pound wooden drays with steel wheels. They use these horses, which are working horses. These are actually part of the Clydesdale family. They're part of the working horse that are from that part of the UK, called Yorkshire horses. This is a picture of them in action. This is right outside the brewery. If you don't work them minimum 4 days a week, their muscle tissue will break down. They're meant to be pulling horses, working horses. Smith actually used to do show horses, just like Budweiser does. They used to have trains of 8 to 10 different horses that they actually would show, and along with the dray on the back. But in this case, they stopped doing that and just simply used the two horses for their workhorses. So very unique. I took that picture myself. I got up at 5:30 in the morning to actually take that picture. I always like to point out, and I've shown it to others, is look at that long line of cars of everybody all disgruntled wait for that damn wagon to get up the street. So. They go up to about 8 miles outside the town of Tadcaster. So, yeah. So, all right. We're going to roll through this one. This is our, so the last beer, we're actually on to, get into this guy, Apricot. So Smith actually has another brewery that they purchased that dates back to 1825. It's in the town of Stamfordshire, and this is actually a unique one. This is dedicated to strictly fruited ales. They started importing these in the late 90s. But anybody remember a beer called Melbourne Brothers? Many years ago? Okay. Good. The reason, do you? Okay. So that is actually same brewery. Too sweet. Okay. So Smith is actually, what's unique about this one is actually it's always, Humphrey, if you've noticed a pattern here, it's all about tradition, all about keeping it in the family. In this case, when he purchased this brewery, it used to be called All Saints Brewery. This brewery sits in the town of Stamford, where a lot of it has a lot of orchards and apiaries, and so they really wanted to keep it more of a fruit-derived brewery, and that's really what the old history kind of showed off. And so in this case, he turned this brewery into a working ale brewery and also museum. And so some of the pictures you'll see are really, really unique, but ultimately the finished product is we have 4 different beers from them. I think this is All Saints. This is the lineup. They do 4 different styles of beer. This is actually, quite honestly, a uniqueness because Smith really wanted to when they started producing an organic lineup of beers, they wanted it to mean something different than the traditional lineup, such as the Nut Brown, the Taddy, the Oatmeal Stout, which is all about the malt bill and the traditionality that came through it. This one is more of what they consider more of a new world. So this is the organic lineup. What you'll notice in this is first, huge amount of nose. What's the first thing you pick up? You pick up apricot? I've heard people say creamsicle, orange sickle, many different things. If you were having the strawberry right now, I'd say strawberry Smuckers. Quite honestly, the other lineup they want you to do is they want you to notice fruit forward. They want you to notice something bright that shines through. Same thing goes with our chocolate stout. Those of you that are chocolate stout, notice the first thing you notice is this huge amount of chocolate bomb that comes off the nose. You taste the beer. There's a little bit of wheat in the apricot ale. There is actually a light amount of hops, 5%. But what is unique with this is that the apricot juice, organic juice, is added to the end of the batch. So the beer is actually a finished ale, organic ale recipe, and they've added the juice on the end of it. So what you get is a very vibrant fruit beer.